Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for joining us here in Shomrei Virtual to continue our shiurim online. So this is part 2 of what I've entitled Haggadah Highlights. And the truth is there are many ways to study the Haggadah. The Haggadah is a primary text in Jewish life. I believe it is the text that's had the most commentaries written on it, or nearly. I just saw today an article. I think in 1960 someone did a survey. There were over 2,000 various Haggadot printed. And I think that number has gone up many times since. There's probably tens of thousands of Haggadah. I remember going in Yeshiva University has a world-class Judaic library, Jewish Studies library, the Gottesman library. They've literally got shelves and shelves and shelves of Haggadah of Pesach, various commentaries, all different styles, all different genres, all different types. And there's so much to talk about, so many different angles to take it from. But as I mentioned last week, that I believe that the purpose of Seder night is not merely an intellectual experience. It's not to study a text, to understand it, to debate it, to go into depth about it. There's plenty of time over Pesach to do that. But as I shared the idea that we have the story of the Master of the 5 rabbis and Bnei Barak, talking about Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, discussing the Seder night, discussing the story of the Exodus all night together. And Rav Shomrei points out that really the Haggadah brings this episode, this story, to demonstrate that which we read beforehand, that even if you're wise and you're knowledgeable, even if you know the story, you still have an obligation to speak about the Exodus from Egypt, to speak about the stories of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the reason is because Seder night is not about knowing, it's not about knowledge, it's not about sort of refreshing our knowledge of the story. Hopefully, as we enter into adult life, having gone through many Seder nights and reading the Torah, Sefer Shemos every year in January, February time, we know fully well the story, at least the basics of the story. It's not about refreshing our memories. It's not about intellectual endeavor. It is about feeling something. On Seder night, it's not just to know, but it's to feel. Seder night is supposed to be an experience that moves us, that takes us to another place. Hopefully next week, I'm planning a shir to talk about, I'm entitling it Seder for the few, not the many. Sort of how, perhaps ideas, both some halachic guidelines, some practical ideas, and also trying to map out, trying to present perhaps the purpose of the Seder, especially this year's Seder, which is so different, which won't have the flavor, which won't have the atmosphere of the people we usually gather around with, and now it's stripped down to a few people. The whole purpose, maybe what we're trying to get out, perhaps it's an opportunity to really, this year, actualize what Seder night is all about. And I think fundamentally it's about feeling something. Therefore, the ideas I've chosen to share are mainly ideas, I think, which are very shareable. They're short, they're poignant, they're punchy, and also they are ideas that are supposed to move us. The ideas are supposed to capture key ideas, key concepts, fundamentals in Judaism, pointing towards the purpose of Seder night, not just mining the text. And that's hence the ideas I've chosen to share. They are of a certain genre. So last week we did part 1. We got through the first half of the Seder, Kadesh, Urchat, Karpas, Yachad, those introductory stages in the Seder, then obviously going into Magid, the meat, the main part of Seder night. We did the first half of Magid, which is what often people spend a lot of time on, which we spent a whole session on last time, but really is an introductory element. It doesn't talk about the Exodus itself, it doesn't talk about the story, it doesn't even really impart the fundamental messages of the night. It's really talking about talking. We speak about doing the mitzvah. We discuss how and when and in what manner and with what props and with who around the table, i.e. the children, does one carry out a Seder. And now the transition is this Vihi Sha'amda, where we cover the matzahs. We got it on the screen. We raise up our glasses, we make this declaration, and each and every generation, people have stood against us, and here we are to tell the story. And then we enter into this story, say ulamad, ma bikei Lavan ha'arami la'aseh Yaakov Avinu. Go and learn that which Lavan, the Aramean, wished to do to our Jacob, our forefather. And here we begin the quoting and exposition and mining of these 4 verses, which is the Pashas HaBikurim, which is the portion that the farmer recites when he brings his new fruits to Jerusalem each and every year at the beginning of each harvest on the Shavuos festival. And the reason Rav Shechter quotes in his Haggadah, again last week I mentioned the various Haggadahs I'm drawing this from Rav Soloveitchik, says the idea why we choose these 4 verses, why we choose to tell the story by basing it around these verses, this micro-history told by the farmer, expressed by the farmer to the priest in Jerusalem, is because what the bringing of Bikurim is all about is thanksgiving. It's an offering to God and thanksgiving for the harvest this year, and really more broadly for the gift of the land of Israel. That is what really Seder night is all about. Yes, it's about recounting and retelling the story, but the purpose is to be as a thanksgiving to God. And hence, as we'll see, the end of Magid, the crescendo, the climax is Hallel. We break out into song, we break out into that thanksgiving of the Hallel prayer. And that's hence why we choose these verses specifically, because at their root, what's underlying, what's underpinning these verses is a sense of thanksgiving. These introductory words, say ulamad, go and learn, echo the same words that Hillel uses in the Talmud. So Erica Browning in her Haggadah points out that in that famous story in the Gemara in Shabbat, Daf Lamed Aleph, that there's a convert who comes to Shammai and comes to Hillel and says, convert me while standing on 1 foot, right? Teach me everything I need to know to convert to Judaism on 1 foot. And Hillel chases him away with that building stick, the builder's staff. I can't teach you the whole of Judaism standing on 1 foot. And what does Hillel say? Hillel says, Ma disani lechavrech, or Ma disani lech, what's hateful for you, don't do it to your friend. I.e. that golden rule, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor like yourself. Don't do unto others what you don't want done unto yourself. And what does Hillel conclude? He says, Ze ikar shal Torah, this is the crux of the Torah. Say ulamat, go and learn the rest. So too says Erica Brown, we begin our exposition, we begin our discussion of this main part of the Haggadah with these words, say ulamat, go and learn, meaning we're going to start the story here. Seder night is just a stimulus, but indeed there's so much more to discuss after the Seder, and the whole rest of Pesach, and really throughout the whole rest of the year, is the time to really elaborate and to build upon the foundations that we're setting out here on Seder night. Lavan Ha'arami. So we discuss here, interesting beginning. We're talking about the Exodus from Egypt. So we obviously should be beginning with Pharaoh and the Egyptians in enslavement there in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Well, we go back a few generations and we start with Lavan, with Laban the Aramean, what he wanted to do to Jacob. Pharaoh, we see in Haggadah, only decreed on the males, and Lavan wanted to destroy us all. So Rabbi Sachs points out that the truth is, from the text itself, it's unclear that Lavan really did want to cause harm to Jacob. We only know it from a dream that God comes to Lavan when he's chasing after Yaakov, when Jacob and his family flee from the house of Laban. God comes to Lavan in a dream and says, don't harm Yaakov, but we never know for sure that that was the intention of Lavan. So as Rabbi Sachs, perhaps Lavan never really meant to harm the Jews, never really meant to harm Yaakov. But the threat from him was actually a much more insidious one, was actually a much more dangerous one. And he quotes from Svi Hirschfarber. So Svi Hirschfarber was an interesting figure of Anglo Jewry. He was a rabbi in the interwar years and a bit after the war in central London, one of the central London United Synagogues, really a hidden gem, really a major rabbinic scholar and thinker. His works have been published and really top-class works. But he was an interesting figure, definitely underappreciated. And he brings it in, he cites this, he sort of explains this using a parable between the sun and the wind. And the sun and the wind are discussing who's more powerful. So the wind says, I'll show you, I'm more powerful. So look at the farmer there plowing his field, working on the field. Who can make the farmer take off his jacket? So the wind starts to blow and blow and blow and blow more and more, thinking the more ferocious the wind, that's the more power I have in order to carry out that which I want to do. And of course, the harder the wind blows, the tighter the farmer holds onto his jacket, the tighter he takes hold and grip of it. Comes the sun out behind the clouds, shines down, beats down onto the farm, and of course, as it warms up within a few minutes, the farmer's taking off the jacket. In other words, warmth is more powerful than wind. We begin here with a discussion of the threat of Laban to the Jewish people more than the threat of Pharaoh, because often the threat of friendliness, the threat of affluence, when things are going well, when people who are out to get us befriend us, not attack us, is actually indeed, as the Haggadah itself presents, can be a greater threat. Rabbi Isaac links this to this bit of the Haggadah on the screen. The verse actually means literally that the Egyptians, they did evil to us, from the word ra, vayanunu, and they afflicted us. And what does it mean? They did evil to us. But it's interesting, the proof text, the verse, the exposition of this is, what does this mean? The Pharaoh tells his advisors, tells his people, come, let's deal wisely with the Jews, lest they'll become multiplied. What's really going on here, the Haggadah clearly understand that Vayareyu, even though literally and usually understood to mean they did evil, could actually come from the root Ra'areya, from a friend, from a neighbor. Vayareyu Isonu Amisim, the Egyptians tried to befriend us, they tried to be friendly neighbors, and that was the plan. Incite the Jews, bring the Jews on board by showing them that we're really friendly with them, that we're doing this as a joint project. We want them to be part of our society, we want them to be part of the growth of our economy. Again, the neighborliness, the friendliness, the love can be more dangerous than the outright enemy. And Rav Asher Weiss in his Haggadah points out that when Yaakov is asked by his sons to send Benjamin, to send his youngest son down to Egypt, because that's what Joseph has asked and Joseph has demanded, what does he say? He says to them, Osi shikaltem. You have made me like childless. You made me bereft. Yosef enenu, he said, Joseph is no longer here. Shimon enenu, remember in the previous trip, Shimon had been taken away. Shimon's no longer here. There's Binyamin tikhu. He says, you're now going to take Benjamin. And then he says these three words, Olai hayu kulana. Basically, upon me is all this. This is too much for me. Rav Asher Weiss links this word Olai, on me, to something Yaakov's mother says to him. When Yaakov is called upon to go ahead and take the blessings and trick his father Yitzchak and take the blessings instead of Esav, Jacob is concerned. He says, wait a minute, how can I do this? How can I deceive my father? Perhaps it's going to cause me harm. Perhaps it's going to bring a curse upon me. And what does Rivka say? She says, Alai kilaloscha beni. Don't worry, Alai, on me is your curse, my son. Meaning, Yaakov, you don't worry, you do what I'm telling, and any evil, even any negative repercussions, Alai. It'll be on my back. This word Alai, Yaakov's reflecting, Alai, now I see the fulfillment, or maybe more than that. What does Alai stand for? Alai stands for Aleph Lamed Yud. Aleph is Esav, so Ayin Lamed Yud. Ayin is Esav, Lamed is Lavan, Yud is Yosef. Yaakov foresaw and intuited he would have three major challenges in his life. The challenge from Esau, the challenge from Lavan, and the challenge from Yosef. That's when he comes to Binyamin, he says, Alai hayu kulana. Meaning, I thought that was enough. I thought I would only have to suffer these three tragedies in my life. The Binyamin as well is not part of the equation. But it's interesting, what are these three challenges? The first is Esau. Esau presents a physical threat. He wants to physically kill Jacob. That is the story of Purim, his descendants. Haman wants to destroy the Jewish people physically. That was the threat we faced in Nazi Germany. Lavan is a very different threat. Lavan is a spiritual threat. He wants to actually befriend us. He wants to change us. He wants to bring us over to his side. That is the threat of Hanukkah, of the Hellenization of the Jews. It's not a physical threat. It's a spiritual one. That is, more recently, the corollary to the Nazi physical destruction. It's the communist religious destruction. But there's a third type of threat, and that is Yosef. The third tragedy, the third trial and tribulation that Jacob has to go through in his life is that of the sale of Yosef, the disbanding and the breaking up of the family unit. And that is the worst of all, because the other two are threats from the outside, whether it be spiritual or whether it be physical. But Yosef, the inner struggle, that inner tension between the tribes, between the brothers, that breakup of the family unit, that dissension amongst the Jewish people, that is actually the worst of all. That is the sinas chinam, that is that baseless hatred that indeed brought about the destruction of the third temple. We could talk about all these things that have happened to the Jews, whether it be Lavan or Paro, these threats, these tragedies from the outside. So often it's actually tragedies we bring from the inside. Moving on in the Haggadah, we say Vayogar Shom, that the Jews dwelled there. Vayeres Mitzrayim, that they went down to Egypt. Onus al pi adibur. Vayogar Shom, they were dwelling there. Melamish lo yarad Yaakov avinu nishtakia b'Mitzrayim elo lo gusham. Yaakov never went down with the intention to remain in Egypt, but rather to sojourn there. Continuing from the previous idea of Shechter explains as follows. The Yaakov really has three choices. He hears now that Joseph, his son, is in Egypt. He could have done one of three things. He could have stayed in Canaan. He was a home. This was his ancestral homeland. This was the land that was promised to Abraham, his grandfather, to his father Yitzchak, to hear himself from God. This was where they were going to build the nation state. Why should he go down to Egypt? Joseph, his son, is there. I'm not going to go. He has to come back to me. That was one choice. Obviously, one he didn't take. The other choice was, you know what? I need to be reunited with my son. I want to see my son. I'll leave the rest of my family here, and I will go down to see Yosef. And the third, and for him was the least best option, was what? We'll all leave Canaan. We'll all go down as a family to Yosef in Egypt. And it came with great risk. We're leaving our ancestral homeland. We're leaving the very place where we've laid down roots, where we thought we'd be building our future. That's what it means. Onus al pi adibur. Yaakov never wanted to go down. His intention, he was even concocting a plan that he could do it another way. He could go and leave the rest of the family behind. Says God, no. More important than mitzvahs ha'aretz, more important than the land of Israel, than the state of Israel, is that you all go down and are united as a family. Keeping the family together, indeed, at that moment, God says, is more important than the land, than your homeland, than the state of Israel. Moving on, Vayisham Lugoy Gadol, Lugoy. They were there as a people, from an expression of Lugoy, is from a nation, from the word Gaviyah, like a body unit, a body politic. They were one as a nation. Means that they stood out. From the word like Metsuyan we have in modern Hebrew, meaning excellent. The Jewish people stood out there. So famously in Rav Shechter, just the terminology he uses is a striking one. What does it mean Metsuyanim Shom? We know from the Medrash that the Jewish people, even though we talk about they descended to the 49th level of tumah, of impurity. At the Yam Suf, we talk about the angels saying to God, why do you save the Jews? They were idolatrous. They were really indistinguishable in many ways, morally, ethically, culturally in many ways from the Egyptians. But the Medrash taught that they did hold on to certain things. They didn't change their names. They didn't change their clothes. They didn't speak Lashon Hara. Those type of what Shechter calls nationalistic mitzvahs. And the scheme of things, they're not the important things. What couple you wear, and whether you're called Yosef or you're called Jack or Joe, it doesn't really make a difference. The key things in Jewish life are clearly halacha. The religious obligations, the mitzvah, the deep, profound, moral, ethical, ritual obligations. But there are certain points where, indeed, those nationalistic mitzvah, those things which are not even maybe mitzvahs, they're minhag, they're custom, they're to do with tradition and the way we carry out and we hold ourselves. Sometimes they take on an extra level of importance, perhaps mostly so in exile. In Havdalah, we say, there are three types of Havdalahs. We say that God has distinguished between Kodesh L'chol, between holy and profane, Ben Or L'choshech, between light and dark, Ben Yisrael L'Am, between the Jews and the other nations. And Ben Or L'choshech, Ben Kodesh L'chol, there's two types of differences. There's the undiscernible difference between holy and profane. You look at two things. You look at the world, you don't necessarily see the difference between holy and profane. Two objects, one could be holy, one could be profane, two people, two experiences, and on the surface of things, there's no difference between them. Ben Or L'choshech is obviously a very easily discernible difference. The difference between night and day is the starkest difference we have. It's these two types of differences, of discerning this, that it has to be Ben Yisrael Amim, that divides the Jews from the other nations. It has to be a difference between Kodesh L'chol. Ostensibly, we look the same, we operate the same, we mix amongst them. We are part of the world, but you dig a little bit deeper, there's a kodesh and a chol. We live a life of holiness. We are different on a deeper level. But there also has to be the distinction of bein or lechoshech, between night and day. On a deeper level, what's the difference? You know, what I can do during the day, I can do during the night. I'm the same person. It's qualitatively, it's not different necessarily, but obviously, viscerally, it's very, very different. So too, when it comes to the Jews and the non-Jews, we need both. We need, obviously, most importantly, is the ben kodesh lechor, the qualitative difference. But it's also the or lechoshech. Sometimes it has to be just the visceral, the outer, the external differences that distinguish between us and others. Also on this word Mitsuyonim Shom, that the Jewish people were Mitsuyon, Rabbi Sachs links the word Mitsuyonim, excellent. They stood out to the word Sion that we use for Israel. And the word Sion is also used by Jeremiah as the people are going into exile. What does he say? Sim Tziyunim al haderech, put signposts along the way. Meaning, again, this idea of Mitsuyonim Shom, they were distinguishable, that they stood out as signposts. Point you in the right direction, it stands out, it stands up from the ground and points you in the right direction. In other words, Zion, which is Israel, which is Zion, is not just a physical place, but it's also a way of life. Zion, the Jews had a Zion mindset. To be a Zionist isn't just to be someone who wants to be in a specific place, who yearns for the land of Israel and the Jewish homeland, the Jewish state, but to be a Zionist is to have this mindset of Mitsuyonim, that we are different, that we have a different signpost in direction in life. Gadol va'atzim. So we're going to move on a little bit in the Haggadah. Vayhi Sham. So Gadol va'atzim. So what does it mean? They were great and they multiply. God made us grow as a nation. Erica Brown points out beautifully that sort of the growth of the Jewish people. We went from a family of 70 souls in this period in Egypt, under oppression, in exile. We grew to a nation of millions. Sort of our growth is under God's miraculous power. And in anything, our growth is a sign of his love. God of autumn, the more they oppressed us, the more God miraculously made us grow. 6 in one kerem, 6 children at one go, the Medrash says. The idea is, as we grow as a nation, God's love for us grows with that. And that's been throughout history. The Jews, and like every nation, although it's been less than you would expect, as time goes on, as the centuries pass, the Jewish people has grown. And Erica Brown is saying that with that, does God's love for us grow with us. V'rov, what does it mean we were many? So the Haggadah here brings a very, very peculiar verse. It describes it, quoting a verse from Yechezkel, Ezekiel 15:16. It describes the maturation and the growth of a girl, a maiden, into a teenager, into a full-blown, fully blossomed woman. So what is this imagery? It's the imagery of an adolescent girl. Says Erica Brown, just as an adolescent girl, any adolescent, overnight goes through metamorphic changes. Her whole being, her whole body changes, and it happens sort of one go. She goes from being a child, now she suddenly matured into an adolescent, into an adult. So it was with the Jewish people. In a very short space of time, in the few months after Moshe emerges as the leader and brings the plagues, we emerge like a teenager emerges into adulthood. But there's a corollary to that. Just as a teenager goes through an angst, goes through a deep sense of self-consciousness, self-awareness, a sort of a self-awkwardness. They're awkward within themselves, and they're worried and concerned how others will see them. So it is the Egyptians started to take notice of us. Just as that child now becomes and grows and develops into an adult and people take notice, they've gone from being the innocent child to this beautiful young woman, so do the Egyptians suddenly saw our growth. They saw something changing amongst the Jewish people, and they took notice. And when they took notice, then they had to scheme against us, and they enslaved us. The end of the verse is God says, it's the imagery of this girl. It's like Mowgli in the jungle. She's growing up. Is sort of as a wild child, no one's to take care of her in the wild. And God says, I passed over and I saw you, you're wallowing in your blood. What did God say? I said to you, in your blood you shall live. In your blood you shall live. And the Medrash explains what's going on here. So the Medrash explains what it's a reference to is God is saying, in the merit of the blood that you offered to me in Egypt, I redeemed you, I saved you. And what were those bloods? the Dam Milah and the Dam Pesach, the two specific mitzvot that we were given just before we left Egypt, in which merit we left, which was the Brit Milah, the circumcision, and the blood of the Paschal lamb that we dabbed on the lintel and on the doorpost. But Rav Asher Weiss in his Haggadah points out it's in the plural. But Domayich, it doesn't say B'domeichai, in your blood, the two blood. It's really four bloods here. Plural, B'domeichai, in your bloods you shall live, in your bloods you shall live. What are the four bloods? There's more than just the two bloods. So he here in his, without quoting in his own language, he really reflects and echoes a famous thing Rav Soloveitchik wrote about in Kol Dodi, the effect of these two covenants that we have with God, called Bris Yehud and Bris Gorol, the covenant of fate and the covenant of destiny, or the covenant of faith. That we became a people, what defines us as a people is both our shared past, that which we've gone through together, our fate, that we've had to suffer together, perhaps the Domayich Chayi, the blood, the pain of the Brit Milah, the blood of the Brit Milah that we inflict on ourselves, that we have that shared sense of suffering, that shared past. And there's the Domai Chayi, there's the other, and that's what was born in Egypt. We, at the crucible of our exile, or the crucible of the pain and of the suffering, there we became an we became a oneness together, we became a people. But there's a second type of covenant we have with God, the covenant of destiny, represented by the Torah, represented by the Korban Pesach, that we came together and we slaughtered the animal, and we sacrificed it to God. It's not about just what others have done to us and the pain inflicted to us. It's also about our sacrifice and our service towards God. Towards God, that is the second type of blood. And he quotes amazingly. There's a machlokas in the Medrash that the Bria Chatikon, running through the center of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in the wilderness, was a Bria Chatikon, the central pole that held the walls together. So you had all the Atzi Shittim owned in this, the cedar planks that stood erect, and then in between there was bored in a hole, and there was a Bria Chatikon, there was a pole that held it all together. And the Medrash said, from where did they get the wood for this central beam, from this central pole? And there's a machloket. One opinion says it was made from the wood of the staff of Yaakov. Yaakov says, B'makli avarti es hayarden hazeh. He says, with this stick I passed over the Jordan. I.e., the stick of Yaakov is the stick. All that he had left is the stick that accompanied him into the dark exile with Lavan. It was the stick he used to shepherd the flocks of Lavan. It was a symbol of the bad times, of the dark nights of the exile. And the other opinion is no. The wood wasn't taken from the staff of Yaakov, but rather the wood, that central beam that held the Mishkan together, was taken from the wood of the Eshel of Avraham and Sarah, the tree that Abraham and Sarah planted, whether physical tree or symbolic tree, in which they hosted people. It was the hostel that they set up, where they fed people, they looked after people, they gave people to drink, and they cared for people. Again, not a symbol of pain, of suffering, of shared fate, but about our destiny. Avram already at the birth of our nation telling us we have a destiny, we have a mission to be full of loving kindness and outreaching a nation that does good for the world. And again, this duality, what exactly was the central beam, meaning that what held the Mishkan together? Was it wood that represents the destiny or the fate, or was it the wood that represented the destiny? Then we say, Hashem, we cried to God. God heard our voice. All that the Egyptians were doing for us. Let's just go on a bit. God took us out from Egypt. And we say, Lo alidei malach v'lo alidei soraf. It wasn't through an emissary, it wasn't through an angel, it wasn't through a soraf, a different type of angel, v'lo alidei shliach, not through a messenger, but rather God himself came and he took us out from Egypt. Rav Soloveitchik, it was quoted in Rav Shechter's Haggadah, explains that there's a difference between what we call a Yeshua, a salvation, and a Geula, a redemption. Yeshua, salvation, can be enacted through intermediaries, through a shaliach, through an emissary of God. And he said, when do we see Yeshua in Jewish history? When do we see salvations? Twice in Jewish history are classic examples of salvations. And we say it in actually the prayers of those festivals. That is Chanukah and Purim. On Chanukah and Purim, they are salvations, they aren't redemptions. After the Purim story, we are saved from a an impending danger, but we don't have redemption. We don't get back immediately to the Beit HaMikdash, to the rebuilding of the temple and going back to Israel. Similarly with Hanukkah, we are redeemed from the predicament, but it doesn't bring about, in the end of the day, it doesn't bring about a full redemption, a complete redemption. He says that, and they are fulfilled through emissaries. And there we insert, and the prayer we insert is Al Hanissim. The Al Hanissim prayer, which talks about Al Yeshua Seinu, about our salvation. And it's specifically, when do we add the Al Hanissim prayer? Specifically in a meal. It's an addition to the main time we add it is an addition to the meal. Because bread, a meal, is something that we partake, that when we bench and we make a blessing over bread, bread is something we are partaking. We had a share and we had a hand in, meaning representing that in a Yeshua, in a salvation, in a temporary salvation, we indeed as humans can be partners. But when it comes to a Geula, a ultimate redemption, a complete redemption, a metamorphosis of our people from one state to another state, that there God doesn't need any emissaries, he doesn't need any help. And hence Moshe's name, Moshe's role is not talked about in the Haggadah. Moving on, in the last few minutes we say here in the last verse, what do we say? God takes us out with an outstretched arm, Zohadeva. This is a reference to the pestilence. Of all the plagues, pestilence, the death of the livestock, is the one which is highlighted. That's to be God's strong hand. And Erica Brown in her Haggadah points out that often it's the death of animals, it's the suffering of animals which moves people the most. And we see in Nineveh, it was the fact that the animals wore sackcloth. Why is it that the king of Nineveh, when Jonah the prophet comes to Nineveh and warns the people, if you don't do repentance, God is going to destroy you, and they take him seriously. And what does the king of Nineveh instruct? He says, you put on sackcloth and adorn the animals with sackcloth. Why adorn the animals with sackcloth? One of the commentators explains because sometimes is when we see an animal in pain, we see this weird sight of an animal in sackcloth, that actually moves a human being more than the plight and the suffering of other human beings. Perhaps it was Zohadeva, God's strong hand is exercised, is demonstrated when the Egyptians, or maybe even when the Jews, they see the death of animals. That's actually the turning point. That's the fifth plague, after which Pharaoh starts to change his mind, meaning, the fifth plague, Pharaoh stops to harden his own heart, and God has to harden his heart. Interesting. That's the pivotal point, because it's perhaps when the suffering of animals moves us as human beings. We see it all the time in our world, when we see those videos, the sent videos of animals and their suffering, that oftentimes is something that gets to our heart more than human beings. Now here, look at this. We say here, the Zorah Nityo, God comes with an outstretched arm, Zohar Cherev. This is the sword that God, so to speak, uses in Egypt. And then look 2 paragraphs later, over Osos. What are the signs or wonders of God? Zohamata. This is the stick that Moshe took and he did the miracles. There's 2 symbols of leadership, of authority. You have a cherev. You have the sword, is obviously a symbol of authority. You can reign over people, a reign of terror in France after the revolution. Or you have Zehamata, a very different type of leadership. You can convince the people, you can lead the people, you can teach the people. We move in the Haggadah, we're saying God had to treat the Egyptians, he had to rule over them with a cherev. They could only understand the will of power, as Nietzsche talks about. When it came to the Jews, Zehamata, Moshe represents now a new type of leadership, not the will to power, but the will to education, the power that comes through true leadership. And she writes that, why does Moshe have a stick specifically? Perhaps this is a crutch for him. Moshe is kavei peh. We say Moshe doesn't have the power of oratory, the power of speech. So God says to Moshe, do you know what? Being an orator as a leader is not the most important thing. Take a stick, show them that it's action. It's what the leader does. It's what the leader performs. What the leader actually gets up to is much more important than what anything the leader can say, however much a leader can inspire and set out a vision with their mouth. It's the stick. It's the symbol of action. It's the symbol of guiding a people like a shepherd guides his flock. We're using the stick is actually the true sense, the true barometer of great leadership. Finally, we move on to the 10 plagues. And it's interesting, Rabbi Sachs discusses how the 10 plagues are much more, speak in the language of the Egyptians. It speaks on their terms. In each of the plagues, God is undermining their conception of how the world works, the order of the universe. And it specifically counterbalances and counteracts their type of, their gods. The Egyptians believe in these big gods, and God says, you know what, kinim. It's specifically by the lice that the Egyptian sorcerers, magic makers, were unable to replicate that. And what do they turn to Pharaoh? They say, Etzvelo kimhi. This must be the finger of God. This is the work of a divine being well above our abilities. Do you think power comes in these great forces of nature, these great powerful gods? Really kinim. So in the most infinitesimal, in the smallest being, in the smaller, invisible to the eye, that is actually the greatest source of destruction for me this year. Struck me, it's not nuclear weapons, it's not tsunamis that we're suffering and that we're facing. It's something so small, perhaps even smaller than the kinim and the lice. It's specifically on that the Egyptians turn around and say, Espalo came here, indeed, this is the work of God. Erica Brown shares a beautiful idea. We take out from the wine as we say the 10 plagues. So the idea of this, obviously we know the idea that there's a sense that we're distraught, even though our enemies were being punished and there was justice being meted out, we don't rejoice over it. There's a certain sense of loss. But she says something else. She says that we take out a little bit of blood. By the end of it, by the 10th one, there's a whole pool of blood. There's a mess. What was a pristine, beautiful cup. And in Haggadah, she talks a lot about how the setting of the Seder, so the scene we set, how we set our Seder table, and how we create the atmosphere. A lot of the visceral, experiential side of the Seder is really also part of it. So we have these beautiful cups, these goblets, and filled with glistening wine, so beautiful and clean, and suddenly we make a mess on the table to represent that even though there was a rebellion going on, yes, the Jews were gaining their freedom. No rebellion is a clean rebellion. In each rebellion, in each uprising, in each struggle for freedom, and it's true nowadays, in all those struggles for freedom, whether it be apartheid in South Africa, or be the Arab Spring, or any civil war, any uprising to overthrow a despotic leader, they're never clean. They're never without their martyrs. So we have to understand. Yes, we're celebrating the 10 plagues, remembering the great miracles and our salvation at this moment, but we create that mess of blood or that mess of red wine on the table to remind us that they came along with its sacrifices. There were those who lost out. And finally, in the last piece, I guess the last major part of Magid, the two last major parts of Magid, is the Dayenu. So in fact, in this Haggadah, the Dayenu, these 15 thanksgivings to God, is a tikkun. It's a rectification. The fact that as a Jewish people, we were thankless. We weren't thankful enough in the 40 years of sojourn in the desert. We came out of Egypt, we didn't thank God straight away. We complained. We complained and we complained. So now each and every year, we speak about Thanksgiving. There's one interesting Thanksgiving we mention is the one about money. We say to God, we didn't give us our money. It's a bit of a strange one. Here we are talking about our freedom, our salvation, and we're talking about, we got the money from the Egyptians. Rabbi Sachs explains that the truth is slavery, an experience of slavery leaves within it a bitterness. The people who's been subjugated and subject to suffering and to slavery in the hands of another nation, it has an after effect of a resentment, of a bitterness. It lives on in the psyche of that person or the psyche of that nation. Hence the Torah tells us when you free a slave, this is a halacha, when they would free a slave, you have to give them a gift of money. You have to enrich them. Why? Because you have to make the slave, put him on his own 2 feet. You have to make him, a person again. You have to make him whole again. And Benno Jacob, he was an Italian Jewish Bible scholar, on the verse by Yinatzlu Mitzrayim, we're told that the Jews literally despoiled. They emptied out Egypt of its wealth. He says Vayinatzlu doesn't mean they despoiled Egypt, but rather Vayinatzlu meaning they saved Egypt. By the Jews getting the money from the Egyptians, it meant they were able to let go of the resentment. They were able to let go of the bitterness that is a byproduct, that is an after effect of slavery. we were repaid for our work. We felt, in a way, we were recompensed. We were made whole again for the wrongs. Again, maybe you can apply it to reparations or not. The idea is we're not allowed to hate the Egyptians. We took their money, and everything thinking it saved the Egyptians in our Jewish eyes. We at least felt that in some way we've been recompensed in some way. The wrongs have been righted. That way we were able to let go. We were able to let go of the hate. And finally, the Maggid concludes with a Hallel, the first half of Hallel. And it's interesting, on Purim, we don't say Hallel. Why? The Gemara tells us because the reading of the story itself, the reading of the Megillah, telling over the miraculous story, or the pseudo-miraculous story of Purim, that itself is a Hallel. That is enough of a thanksgiving, of a recognition of the miracles. So the question is, wait a minute, we've just spent the last few hours recounting Maggid, telling the story of the Exodus. Surely that should be the same. Kriyasa Zuhelela, telling the story like by Megillah, like by Purim, should be enough to count as the Hallel. Nonetheless, here we are about to say Hallel. We start reciting the Hallel at the end of the Maggid. That's because, as the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin explains, there's two types of Hallels. There's a Hallel for a miracle in the past, where we recount the past, we look back and we thank God for look what you did for us in the past. That's what we're doing on Purim. We're not experiencing the miracle today, here and now. We're thanking God. We're recounting what happened in the past. But on Seder night, it's not enough to just recount the past. It's about bringing the past to the present. It's about reliving it. It's about making it real. And when you experience a miracle, when you go through it yourself, and there's that automatic, that immediate, that natural response to thank God, to turn around, to break out in song and dance and a Hallel, that's a very different type of Hallel. That's what's called Hallel B'Shas HaNes, the Hallel that occurs at the time of the miracle, and that's what's going on Seder night. Yes, like Purim, we've recounted the story. That should be enough to discharge our requirement. That should be in the place of reciting Hallel, of giving a thanksgiving. But on Seder night, when we bring it to life, we have to relive the Exodus from Egypt, to show, to demonstrate that we ourselves are going through it. Now it demands of us to sing a Hallel, just like they did in the time of the Exodus. They turned around to God and they sang the Shira, the Song of the Sea. So too, on Seder night itself, we have to say Hallel. We have to thank God, not for a miracle that was once, that was once in the past, but for a miracle we're re-experiencing and reliving each and every year. Okay, stop there.